All right, I am pressing the button and we are live now.
All right. Well, in the interest of time, good evening, or I guess good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for coming out here. We'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. We'll start off with a formal roll call, and then we'll do some updates and kind of talk about what we've been discussing more so in the subcommittees meetings, as well as kind of our plan of attack and going forward after we get that April 15th date under our belt. So we can go ahead and just start from the 1st Congressional District. Commissioner Tobias?
Present.
Okay. And I do not see Commissioner Anthony. We'll keep an eye out for him here. Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd?
Present.
Okay. Commissioner Rangel from the 4th?
Present.
All right. Commissioner Rand from the 5th Congressional?
Present.
All right. Commissioner Prentice from the 6th?
Present.
Okay. And I don't see Jason here, but we'll keep an eye out. And Commissioner Phillips from the 8th?
Present.
All right. And I am here as well. And so we'll go ahead and move forward. And so the first business order we have here is more so the portal update. So Jack, I'm not sure if you want to go there or Moon, feel free.
I had just planned on just generally saying that it's been going very well recently, and that we would disseminate Moon's team tomorrow, I believe, will be giving us another of their weekly updates. We've had a little bit of trouble getting those to all of you, and I apologize to that, but I apologize for that. But I'll say that we're at over almost 800 total submissions in the portal, 600 something of which are actual COIs, which I think is awesome news. I'm sorry, I don't remember all the numbers from the top of my head. Yeah, it looks like Moon's sharing her screen now. But 787 there. So just that I was excited. I was checking it all weekend and seeing them sort of pour in. Yeah, 647 of which are communities of interest. Obviously, all input's good input, but I know that we've focused a lot on those COIs, and I think that's a great thing. So just I think whenever you're talking to people, remind them that the portal exists, and that it's not closing, so they can keep giving input. That's all I really wanted to say about that.
Yep. I would just add, so I'm on the search page now, which you can get to just from going to the regular portal link, putting /search to get to the advanced search page, or there's a button to get here from the front. And then you can browse the gallery, or you can look around. You can, for instance, like click on a tag, like Senate. And that should, that's not working right now. But you should be able to get to detail pages. You should be able to search by keywords or search by tags. And so like if I put in Senate as the tag and search on that, I find 5 plans where someone's opted for for a Senate tag. And so we tried to make this pretty flexible so that you can look around and see what you think. And then I will also just very briefly share with you what the format looks like for the reports that we've been delivering on a weekly basis. That will be posted publicly as soon as that's possible to do. So here, for instance, is the overview through July 25th. So this is last week's overview. We deliver them every Wednesday. And it just has a week by week description showing you a summary so you can see the trends for what kinds of submissions are coming in, and then week by week telling you what we're noticing, and with links to examples back in the portal so that you can go through and see what kind of, this is all being done by human intelligence. And ultimately also we'll be giving you a summary report at the end of the process of COIs that will also use some kind of mathematical clustering techniques to not just tell you what the humans found, but also tell you kind of what words came up most and other kinds of visualizations to support that. Any questions about that before I stop? Oh, I'll show you too, because this is really cool. Our team figured out how to give you these really neat COI coverage maps so you can see what's being mapped. And you officially got this week to full coverage. So every part of the state has been involved in someone's submission of a community of interest, which I think is a great milestone. And then we break these down by area. So here is the greater Milwaukee area, Southwest Wisconsin, River Falls, Eau Claire communities of interest, and you can ask for any other focus areas in the state that you want to see, and we will make you corresponding insets. I think we added a few new ones for this week's mapping based on input from the line drawers. So please continue to tell us what you want to see, and we try to provide you a report that answers to your requests.
And Moon, sorry for not knowing this, but where are those reports? Like, where can we access those? Where do those go?
So we share them with you in basically a Dropbox. So there's a link with,
Gotcha.
and so most of what's here is fully public. It's just a description of exactly what's in the gallery. There's also a password protected place where we share with you the user's contact information that's not made fully public. So there's both a kind of aggregation that everyone should have access to. And then there's the slightly more sensitive information, which includes people's verified email addresses.
And Ben, I'll send you the most recent of that Dropbox that I have. I'll do it while we're on this call. I don't know if it's the same Dropbox every. Okay, so then I'll just send you the Dropbox I've got.
It's the same one. Yeah. I'm asking, sorry. It is the same one? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't see the head nod. Okay, so we shouldn't expect to get like a new email every single time one of those reports is submitted. It's just the same Dropbox. We should probably bookmark or something to refer back to.
You could do that. Or I do believe we sort of send a notification email to Jack every week when the new report has been published.
Not to the whole commission though. Okay.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's possible too. If you don't want to see that.
I know there's been some issues with kind of getting everybody on there, but Jack mentioned before we're trying to get everybody on. I'm getting a couple of them. Like I got one last week as well, and so we'll try to get it distributed out.
Yeah, and again, the intent is for this to be fully transparent, fully public, and for these reports to make their way onto the commission's website when you are able to do that. In terms of
which should be very soon. Maddie's working on that, so we're going to aggregate them all, get them all together tomorrow. The public facing ones, and send them over to the website people. So.
Does anyone have any questions about the feedback collection process, or about how we're kind of filtering that to, I should say, we're not filtering the submissions. So everything that is submitted by the public is available kind of completely unfiltered, uncensored in the gallery, but we are trying to aggregate and give some kind of summary and trend indication each week. So any questions about that? Okay.
Well, I feel like I know how we're using the COI, but it looks like there's 140 that must be district maps of some sort, and not wanting to invent more work, but how are we responding to those?
So our plan for how to use public submissions of districting plans is that when you start making draft maps, you'll be able to compare their properties to the public submissions. So for instance, we'll give you a summary of like the county splits in the public submissions, and any metric that you look at that kind of corresponds to your criteria will tell you not only how your draft maps did, but also how the public did.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Sorry, guys. I was talking to Howard. He's trying to get on. Jack, just FYI, just resend him another link. So
I'll keep watch.
So just to follow up then, that public comment on like analyzing the submitted map, that will be available back to the public. So people will be able to know how we in some way analyze their map. Okay, that's cool. That's really cool. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. We're excited about that too. That's one of the things that you guys have been doing a great job collectively in Wisconsin of getting a lot of public engagement, and that's going to make it, I think, really useful to compare your work to kind of everybody else's.
Okay.
Jack, I'm wondering if there's someone on your team that might be able to work with Moon's team to create maybe like an infographic or something that we would have ready at some point to be able to describe this engagement process and How many things are
Yeah.
coming in and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think that the, obviously these working meetings they're open to the public, but there's not very many people that watch them simultaneously. But in the next few weeks, this kind of bleeds into our next bullet point. So I guess maybe I'll take a slight lead on this and then let you guys talk any substance. But just, we have another working meeting next Wednesday, the 11th. And then the census data comes out probably later that week, maybe as late as August 16th. They've been saying, Moon pointed out, before August 16th. So our thought, and when I say our, I mean really the line drawing committee that has been working with Moon a little closer, was that then we would have a much more public hearing the week following the census data, maybe the week of the 23rd. And I know I've been, I think, to send a doodle poll, and I literally have it in front of me right now to send either during once I'm done talking or after this meeting. The thought being that at that point, the commission could give a public update of where it's at, what it's going to do with the census data, and what input it's received by then. I say this all to answer your question by saying I think it'll be useful at that time for us to have some graphics. For instance, I don't know if you remember when you guys had the criteria hearing, we accompanied with it some graphics and information about how many people had, how many experts had testified. I think it was 18. How many Wisconsinites we'd heard from, over 1,000, where they were from, 65 counties at that point, which maybe now it's more, I hope. So we will be working on getting something like that together for around that time. And that actually pretty much sums up everything I had to say for the August 11th meeting and beyond. I mean, I think that the August 11th meeting, it sounds like, will be follow up from today's meeting. The next thing we're gonna talk about is the metrics and criteria, implementation of the criteria that Moon's been working on. And my understanding is that then you guys will discuss those criteria. The line drawing committee and Moon have been working primarily with assembly maps, but taking those same criteria and algorithms and applying it to Senate and congressional, discuss those. And then the hope is that during that August 23rd meeting, you guys will have some preliminary maps to show the world, or week of August 23rd. I don't mean to say August 23rd itself. Preliminary maps to sort of show the world and say, this is what we're going to work with the census data off of, and continue to take feedback on those in the portal and stuff like that. So I've exhausted all that I know about how that process could work. And so I guess I'd ask Moon or anyone else to jump in and talk about that or ask questions.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll jump in. Did somebody else?
I think Anne-Marie raised her hand for two.
Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Jack, if there is a possibility on August 23rd, I know it's the middle of summer and everybody's schedules are kind of hairy, but would it be a possibility to have a face-to-face meeting in Madison? Is that within the realm?
So the reason I hadn't sent the email yet is because I was writing it to say there were going to be two options to respond, whether you could do it virtually at that time or in person. But I just talked to Chris on the phone before this, and he was a little concerned with the Delta variant and all that. I don't mean to put it just on him. I mean,
you can put it on me. It's okay.
No,
it's okay. I see it every day.
I mean, essentially all of government everywhere is thinking about this and what's appropriate. So I can't say that I'm opposed to it, but I also can't say that it'll happen that way for sure. So maybe I'll still send the email asking for availability virtually and availability in person, but just bearing in mind that this is happening. And I'm the last person to know about the actual medical, stuff. So Chris can speak to that, I guess, and put on a different hat. But yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. When we had the subcommittee meeting last week, I thought we had talked about a meeting the week of the 16th, using the fact that, okay, the census numbers are going to come out and everybody's going to be excited about it. we had talked about maybe having a meeting the week of the 16th with our preliminary maps using preliminary 2020 census numbers, and then announcing then that, hey, these are, this is what we have. These will change as we use the real census numbers. But when you say the meeting of the 23rd, Jack, would that be with the real census numbers or the preliminary, the previous?
I was speaking about the meeting that you were just talking about, essentially, which is to preliminary maps and say, this is what we're going to work on with the census data. So I had just sort of pushed it because we were nearing it, but I can include some dates in the week of the 16th as well. I do agree, maximum, attention is a good thing. So
one clarification on the timeline there is, so the data will be released in sort of raw form by the 16th, and will take some time to process. So I think you should build in some time before you start drawing in the new numbers. And so anything that, I think it's a great idea to talk to the public the week of the 16th, because there will be a lot of attention, I think, on the new numbers, but that what you show that week, if you show maps, will still be maps based on estimates. With the expectation that by the end of August, you can be drawing in new numbers.
Yeah, I mean, you'll send your doodle poll, but I think if people can meet the week of the 16th, we ought to do that. The 19th is a Thursday or the 18th is a Wednesday. I would encourage that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. We can definitely send out the doodle and kind of see how people are feeling towards that. Ultimately, we don't know which way things are going. As Jack was saying, the world has changed a little bit since the beginning of this month and now. And so, just in projecting where things may be going, it may be better to offer some buffer time to kind of see where we're at. This is not the avenue to ask everyone their vaccination status and everything like that, because that's personal and I don't want to do that. But I will say, as someone who is practicing on the front line now, it's starting to resemble how we were back in December for a lot of people, both vaccinated and unvaccinated. And so I just want to keep that in mind as we go forward and as we're trying to plan for in-person meetings too. But definitely not taking it off the table. I just want that to be in the back of everyone's mind. So. Now with that happy news, right? Sorry. Howard came on. Okay. There we go.
Here's Howard. Well, I will include that Wednesday and Thursday in the doodle poll that I'm doing right now. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I guess we can jump to our next topic, Moon, if you want to go ahead with that.
Sure. So I think next we wanted to talk about some of the progress that's happened in the line drawer subcommittee. I've been meeting within a smaller group to work towards having some sample maps. And so I can speak a little bit to process and progress, but I want to emphasize, as I always say and sincerely mean, that I just, I view my role as a supporting role. So I'm happy to kind of lead the conversation, but I really take very seriously like the modesty of my role as one that helps you to implement and enable your ideas. Okay, so having said that, we have some really great progress to report, and I want to share a little presentation that has been evolving over the weeks that we've been working on this to talk about what has been happening. So here's a lot of details and so on that I don't expect you to read right now, but this also is fully public and available, all the content of this slideshow. And an important thing is that as we make new sample plans, according to the specifications that the line drawers have been communicating, we post them publicly at districtyear.org/tag/PMC districts, where people can open up the plans and play around with them and modify them and interact with them however they want. Okay, so I just want to show you some pictures first and then talk about the metrics that are made to operationalize or interpret your criteria. And then talk about the progress we've made to finding interesting initial plans. Before I go any further, a note about process. In my lab, we have various kinds of searching algorithms that can look for plans. They can make plans fully randomly that just adhere to various subsets of criteria. And please ask me if you want any details, but the process is not only random, but has a kind of distribution that we can understand and say things about. So these are algorithms for generating plans. And through a combination of neutral searches and targeted searches, we've been trying to find assembly maps that line up particularly well with your criteria, just to use as starting points. So nobody, least of all me, is suggesting that any map I'm about to show you would be suitable for adoption. It will not. These will just be starting points for you to use, taking communities of interest into account, modifying them with your local knowledge and with what you've been hearing from your constituents to produce the maps that you'll eventually propose. So here's a description of some interesting starting points found by various kinds of algorithmic searches. Okay, so here are some plans, and I've indicated some of the search criteria. And by, for comparison, here's the enacted assembly plan that you can see sort of and look at compared to the rest. These are all population balanced with respect to the American Community Survey estimate that was released, the 5-year rolling average that was released in 2019. So just to say, the population basis here is an estimated data product that came from the Census Bureau. We'll be updating this when we get the new data. Okay, here's some plans, here's some more plans, here's some more plans, and here are yet more plans. And right now that was just intended to be like a kind of blur of options. And I want to describe to you in a little bit more detail how we've been iterating towards finding plans that kind of fit the bill for your criteria. So here's an overwhelming table of stuff. But what you're seeing is the numbered plans down the left, which are the sample plans that I showed you on the previous slides, statistics on the enacted plan at the bottom, and the row in gray in between is what would be ideal according to your criteria that you articulated and that we're sort of discussing how to interpret. So for instance, the first few columns here are the number of counties that are split and the number of pieces that they're split into, the number of towns that are split and the number of pieces that they're split into. After that is a compactness statistic, which I can explain, but really the point is lower is better. Then a kind of partisanship snapshot, because as you know, one of your criteria is that you're interested in finding proportionality. So I'll discuss a little bit more how this helps you think about a proportional outcome. But just to say right now, what's written at the bottom in the PMC ideal row is that 49.5% Republican would be the ideally proportional outcome. What that means is this is based on 8 statewide elections. I can sort of remind you the list of what they are, but it's a range of statewide elections that happened over the last census cycle. And if you take all those elections together, the proportional, if you took a seat share proportional to the vote share across all those elections, it would tell you that 49.5% Republican and 50.5% Democratic is the overall aggregate observed vote share. And so if you were to try to be ideally proportional, you'd try to hit 49.5 so that the seats would track with the votes. Any questions about that? Okay, since these are plans with 99 seats, these are assembly plans across 8 elections. If you sort of multiply all that out, your ideal would be that 392 times a district would be won by the Republican candidate. And the balance of the times, 400 times the district would be won by the Democratic candidate. That's what would give you perfect proportionality. Okay, questions? So next we have, so those 4 columns GOP seats, party lean, total seats over proportionality, and absolute seat difference from proportionality. Those are just 4 ways of thinking about partisanship. Next is like, how many seats were won by Republicans in each of these 8 elections? I can delve into any of this at the level that you're interested in. Next is a column that this was just a for your information column that reports how many districts are at least 40% people of color. I want to emphasize this is not an interpretation of the Voting Rights Act. This is just to give you a sense of how much variability there is in terms of the kind of racial and ethnic composition of the districts. Actually, what you'll notice is that all these districts are kind of in the same range for that statistic. And then a population deviation column that you see there. Actually, I'm just going to switch where the people are on the screen right now so I can see what's at the end. Right, and then a note about proportionality that I'll delve into a little bit more in a moment. Okay, so anyway, this is just a great big table with a bunch of cells that contain information about scores that relate to your criteria. They may not be precise interpretations of your criteria because that's very difficult, but all of this is related to the various criteria that are on your roster. Okay, so something that may jump out to you right away is that the enacted plan has the 60% Republican performance, and like all the random plans that were produced by various combinations of searches are clocking in somewhere in the mid 50s, low 50s, and sometimes you can get down to 49.5. Well, something that you should sort of notice from this is that none of these ever get below 49.5. So as is well known, just the geography of where people live who tend to vote for Republicans and for Democrats make it somewhat easier to draw districts that favor Republicans modestly. And this is giving you a sense of just how strong that pull is over various kinds of ways of searching for more proportional plans. The only other thing I'll say about this screen for now is that the things that are highlighted in green are kind of the better scores with respect to your criteria, according to the interpretations I've been discussing with the line drawing committee. Right, so you'll notice that the enacted plan has a really good population deviation, whereas most of the plans that we searched for, we were requiring to have 2% deviation or less. You'll see one plan in there that has a looser population deviation because there was a point of curiosity about whether that would make things easier to find. And then here's the good news: as our conversations continued, the last batch of plans that came out of these processes, like you're starting to see lots of green cells. So as we refined the conversations about what you're looking for, we're finding things that satisfy your criteria really well on more and more. You're checking more and more boxes from your list of criteria. In particular, one question that came up at the last line drawers meeting was, what if you tried to use these algorithmic techniques to get plans whose population deviation is tighter than 2%? Could you go down to 1% or 0.5%? The answer is yes, you can do that without sacrificing a lot of the other goals. Okay, last caveat about this for now is that there is absolutely no claim being made here that any of these plans are optimal. Nobody's saying these are the best plans. These are just examples. And the ask from the line drawers committee is, could you find an example with these properties? Can you find an example with these properties? So these are just supposed to be interesting starting points. And I'll say a little bit more about them, and especially how to think about proportionality, because I think there's a decision for you all to make as an entire commission. But for now, any questions about this, about what I've presented so far? Ben, should I go ahead and call on people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't see everybody. Go ahead.
Okay.
Cool. Can you explain one more time what the column, I don't know what number it is. I think it says ABS seats different from proportionality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let me explain those two columns. So you're seeing total seats over proportionality and absolute seats difference from proportionality. What I'd like to do is there's a picture explanation of those that's coming up in 2 slides. So let me defer that for just a second. And I will absolutely come back and explain how to think about whether a plan is kind of doing well by the lights of proportionality. So let me just skip ahead to that. But quickly, any other questions from this data table until for now? Okay, great. So quickly, these are some Milwaukee area insets, just because the units get a little smaller. And so there's some zoom in so that you can kind of get a sense of how these maps do, making assembly districts in the Milwaukee area. And because all these plans are loaded in that districtor page, you can do this yourself and zoom in and see how they treat different parts of the state. And what I understand your process to be over the coming weeks will be, we're trying to get a line drawer hired, or you're trying to get a line drawer hired. And when you do, you'll be sitting down with your line drawer to sort of talk about how you might modify these lines. But this is just to give you a sense of what the starting points look like. Okay, so now to get back to Ben's question, what was all this business about different ways of measuring proportionality? Okay, so I have a couple pictures. This won't be a giant lecture, I promise, but I have a couple pictures, and when I've tried them on people so far, these pictures seem to really help. That's an overwhelming table of numbers that I gave you before, and I think this picture will help slice through some of that and give you a really intuitive sense of what it would mean to have a plan that's more proportional or less. Okay, so this picture is showing you which 8 elections are being considered. So this is all the gubernatorial, senatorial, and presidential elections that occurred since 2012 up to 2018. We'll get the 2020 election in here when we can. For those elections, the blue line is proportionality. And again, we had to pick a point of view party and we picked Republicans, could have picked Democrats, picked Republicans. So the blue line is showing you what was the Republican vote share in each of those elections. You can see Wisconsin is an incredibly purple state. News flash to none of you. Sometimes that proportional line goes above 50, sometimes below, but it's always hugging pretty close to 50%. It changes sides, and that's the thing that averages out to 49.5% Republican over these 8 elections. It's the average of those 8. Now, some of you have heard of a metric that got a lot of attention in the last few years called the efficiency gap, which talks about a different notion of partisan fairness. I just want to point out, it's really, really easy to understand efficiency gap in this picture. Efficiency gap is just, you take the proportionality point and you double how far it is away from 50%. So if it was at 53, you go up to 56. If it was at 46, you go down to 42. It's just twice as far away. That's exactly what efficiency gap does. It performs proportionally. And in all the others, it's a 10 to 15 seat, if I'm reading the numbers right, that's just eyeballed off this chart, 10 to 15 seat excess for Republicans relative to the proportional outcome. Any questions about how to read this? Because I want to use this kind of, I think this visualization really shows you something about a plan. It's not just asking how does that plan perform in one election, but it's showing you across the different ways that people voted, whether Scott Walker was on the ballot or whether Tammy Baldwin was on the ballot, whoever was on the ballot. This is showing you kind of party preference actually observed when the people of Wisconsin went to the ballot box. Okay, so now let's look at some of these random plans and see how they do. So these are some of the plans that were made with just the basic constraints. And for the purposes of this discussion, all I want to show you is that sometimes there are plans that really go up and down as the sea level of statewide preferences rises and falls. Some plans rise and fall with the level, and you can really understand the performance in a range of electoral conditions by looking at a plot like this. Okay. So let's start to walk through our progress over the last few weeks as we made plans that checked more and more of the boxes in your criteria, and so that we can think about kind of how proportionality, the way it's set up in your criteria is that proportionality is the lowest ranked of your criteria. And among plans that are all designed well with respect to higher criteria, sorry to say the word criteria 17 times in one sentence, but your instructions tell you to prefer ones that are proportional as long as you're not sacrificing the higher ranked priorities. Okay, so let's step through and see what happens. So here are plans that are designed to keep counties whole, or plans that are designed to preferentially keep cities whole, cities, towns, townships. And so you can see you get a bunch of different kind of behavior out of those relative to that 50% line. And something starts to emerge here that I think is an interesting theme for us to discuss. Some of the plans are very responsive. they favor each side when that side has a vote majority. So they favor Democrats when there's a Democratic majority. They favor Republicans when there's a Republican majority. They respond to the changing patterns of the electorate. And what we'll see as we go is that if you're looking for something that performs proportionally, you can find something that follows the blue line very closely, or you can find something that rises and falls as that blue line rises and falls. And that is a decision that I think you all face to deliberate about today, is whether you prefer something more stable or something more responsive. And I'll give you a few kind of indicators for how to think about that, but ultimately that's your decision. Okay. So here, this gets to Ben's question. What were those columns about before that separated like the difference from proportionality and the absolute difference? So in math terms, sometimes you talk about a number that could be signed, it could be positive or negative. Sometimes you talk about its absolute value or its magnitude, just how big that number is. So the question here is, when we seek proportionality, if we have a plan whose performance sometimes dips below and sometimes dips above, that's like having numbers that are sometimes negative and sometimes positive that tell you how far you are from proportionality. The question is, should you let the positives and negatives cancel out? Right, so the two columns, Ben, one of them were just adding positives and negatives and letting them cancel. And the other one was adding the absolute value so that you're not allowing cancellation. And I'll go back and show you that again in a second. But if you don't like thinking like a math teacher, that was me with my math teacher hat on. Just think about it in terms of the picture. Are you happy with something that waves up and down, but averages out in line with the statewide preferences? Or do you want something that hugs closer to the line? Right, that's the question. Which of those are you trying to kind of prioritize?
So which one is more responsive, being more responsive versus being more proportional?
Well, we're calling it stable because they're both proportional.
Stable. Yeah,
right?
stable.
They're both proportional overall. So we came up with the sort of tentative nomenclature, highly responsive for the things that wave up and down but balance out overall, and stable for the things that track proportionality much more closely. Does that make sense? I hope the picture really helps make that kind of give you a different way of thinking about it than the wall of numbers. Okay. All right, so I want to give you just a little bit more of an inkling, like a few more tools with which to make that decision.
Wait, Moon,
yes.
Sorry, can I just revoice?
Yes.
Can you go back to that last slide?
Absolutely.
And so if we're looking at the bottom right graph, the dotted lines that are closer to the blue thick line are going to be the corresponding to that the chart you showed us. It'll be the column with the number and the absolute number would be the lowest.
That's correct.
Okay.
Exactly right. Yeah, great. So these are the ones that I'm calling stable, and they have the lowest absolute deviation from the blue line. On the ones that are top left here, if you have sometimes negative numbers and sometimes positive numbers, but if you add up those absolute values, you get something pretty big. That's exactly right. So whether you're a numerical thinker or a geometric picture thinker, I hope this gives you two ways of thinking about the same question.
Can I ask, I'm not the mathematician here, when it's anchored now, is it anchored to the mood, if you will, or the climate of the political situation in Wisconsin today? And if you have something that is more responsive, will that be more responsive to particularly if the mood changes over time? Or are we otherwise anchoring to today?
This is a great question. Actually, earlier today, I was on a commission meeting of the Arizona Commission. They were wrestling with exactly this question, or how I interpret question, which is, I'm showing you 10 years of past statewide elections. And so you could very well ask, can we expect this to be predictive of the next 10 years? Right? That's a great question. And it's a live question. It's an open question. So what people sometimes do in the political science literature is they take these past elections and they try to combine them all into one predictive vote index. And what this is doing is giving you the tools to not try to combine, but to take the elections as they fell one at a time. And I can tell you that this approach is partly informed by analyzing my home state of Massachusetts, which is something that here in Massachusetts, vote one way in Senate and presidential elections and very differently in governor's elections. We love Republican governors, and we've never sent a Republican to the House of Representatives since 1994, right? So we have very different voting patterns for different kind of offices here in Massachusetts. If you were to try to blend those together, you'd just get a purple mash that's uninformative. And that's kind of the thinking behind presenting you these elections one at a time as the votes fell, rather than trying to stew them together. Another advantage of but I'm also happy to make you a combined vote index, because again, I'm trying to facilitate your ideas. But this is the most individuated way to think about the elections, is separately. And then you're welcome to give me instructions about how you'd like to combine them if you would like to combine them. This is showing you all the information. The other comment that I would make about this is sometimes people get in the business of trying to say which kind of election best approximates, in this case, it's assembly voting. So people would try to say, is assembly voting more like how people vote for president in Wisconsin? Or is it more like how people vote for governor in Wisconsin? This approach is designed so that you do not have to make a decision like that at all. Instead, this approach is geared towards watching the sea level rise and fall. So in this approach, it's actually advantageous to take weird elections, like the Tammy Baldwin election, as you can see in a lot of these pictures, was pretty unusual, the most recent one. And so you don't need to try to find typical elections. You can look at the anomalous ones and the typical ones and get the sense of how voting patterns change depending on context, candidates, and moment. And as you said, the climate, right? And so this is really giving you a longitudinal view of all the upper ballot, the top of the ballot elections for the last census cycle. Any other questions about this? Okay, so just a last couple of things. So to the decision that you face today, which I don't, it's not a hard and fast forever decision, but it is something that I would like your guidance on, is whether you as a commission are interested in starting plans that are more responsive, more stable, or if you want to see a mix of both. That's all of those are on the table. Ask and ye shall receive. But this is just supposed to be one more tool with which to make the decision about responsive versus stable. And that is something that I think you have frequently heard from the public, is that they're interested in competitiveness. And so just to point out, responsive plans promote competitive districts. And so if you want, competitiveness is not named as a specific priority in your criteria, but if you want competitiveness as an ancillary benefit, then responsive plans, I'm going to give you a point of view that sort of indicates that responsive plans tend to have more competitive districts. And this makes sense. This is just intuitive. If you have a plan that sometimes has an outcome that's very Democratic and sometimes it has an outcome that's very Republican, necessarily there are some districts that are changing which party wins from election to election. And so we measured that across these elections and found that across these 3 responsive plans, each of them had 30 to 34 out of 99 districts that sometimes went Democratic and sometimes went Republican. Notice that's a whole lot of districts. It's about 2/3 of the districts that were always Democratic or always Republican, because in fact, the people are fairly polarized in terms of geography, but that polarization is not destiny, right? And so this gives you the option for the responsive plans have more districts that sometimes switch sides. As it happens, all 3 stable plans that we produced had exactly 17 such districts out of 99. And that means that if I can do some live subtraction, that's 82 districts never changed hands across the 8 elections in the stable plans. So this is just a way of thinking about what it's like to live in a responsive plan versus a stable plan. I have one last visual that goes with that, and then I will wrap up. So this is, if you want to think about, so these are plans 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 from the data tables before. And what you can see is there's some districts in each of these plans that went Republican all 8 times in the 8 elections. Some districts that went Democratic all 8 times. And then the districts that I'm calling swing districts that were sometimes had more votes for the Democrat and sometimes had more votes for the Republican. And so the responsive maps have in that swing category 30 to 34 districts, while all the stable maps have 17 in the middle. And so they're very, the balance is very much skewed to the sides. Districts that are always Democratic are always Republican. Is this diagram making sense? Okay. And so I hope that all gives a visual that really helps support. And I'm just rewinding to these data tables. That was just visuals that were intended to like demystify and make friendlier these data tables. So it's all the same information, just presented visually versus numerically. And with that, I'd love to ask you all if you have any follow-up questions. And then I'd love to hear your guidance about this responsive or stable proportionality.
Go ahead, Tony. Yeah. Do you have a question or?
I don't have any questions. Just I would think we'd want to have maps that are more responsive, I guess.
I do have a question before we jump into general conversation about our preferences. When you said this is all this information you just shared is accessible publicly, where exactly is this, like the slides that you just shared?
So first of all, all the plans, we've been posting to this PMC districts tag. So let me just reshare the title slide, and then the PDF of the slides I just gave you, I've been sharing with the line drawers committee, and then hopefully they will share that not only with the full commission, but with the public. This is all intended to be fully transparent and public.
Cool.
But yeah.
As a non-member of the line drawing committee, I would love for that committee to share that with the rest of the folks. Cool, thanks. And then I don't have any other questions. I think I got some thoughts on what we should do as a commission, but I'll open it up to the rest of the folks who have questions.
Great, and I'm just highlighting this link again, where everyone please go and open these plans and play around with them and zoom in to the part of the state that you know and see what you think.
Yeah, and Ben, I just wanted to let you guys know. So, this was discussed too. Moon kind of did this breakdown for us too, somewhat to this extent, with regards to how all the lines sort of fell and how those bar graphs looked. And so we just wanted more so for everyone to kind of go through that same sort of impromptu lesson from Moon before we send it out, so it can make a little bit more sense. So we weren't keeping it from you guys. We just wanted to make sure that we had this this venue in order to kind of have her explain it a bit. So.
Is this table on the district.org tag site too, Moon?
No, but it's in the link that I shared with the line drawers committee. And because I shared it with you as a link, it live updates as we add more plans to it. So I'm happy I'll grab that link now and put it in the chat so that everybody has access to it.
It could be good to that point. So I'm thinking of like a community member or other folks who have been invested in this process for a long, long time. If they go to the website, the district or tag PMC website, and they see the different plans, it might be hard for them to know the differences between the plans without that table.
That's a great idea. I think rather than posting the link now, I'll just, when we end this meeting, I'll just put it up on the PMC district page so that it's available to you and to anyone else who's listening.
Great, thank you. And Chris, I wasn't suggesting that. I felt like I was information was being kept from me. I was just, this is exciting stuff. And
absolutely,
I'm just thinking about sharing it on my social and having people see it. And so it was just like, cool, how can I share this data? This is really cool.
Absolutely.
And helpful.
Any other thoughts on just kind of in general, and then we can kind of get into the conversation about responsiveness and I guess stability, which way to go. It seems to a couple people have already voiced their opinion, but does anyone have any opinions on kind of remaining closer to the stability aspect of it versus the responsiveness?
I couldn't tell so much from the table, but I'm curious, like how much it swings other criteria one way or the other, or if it doesn't swing it one way, or does it have any impact on the others?
Yeah, we found, and let me share that part of the table again. But the short answer is we found no conflict at all in simultaneously meeting all of the goals. So we were able to hit kind of like the better number range for split counties, county pieces, split towns, town pieces, compactness, with whichever population deviation range we were searching in. And I put the number of districts that were at least 40% POC, people of color, not because that's one of your goals, but just to see if that number changed when you turned some of these other knobs. And we were able to simultaneously check all the boxes that the line drawers communicated to us to look for. So by the way that your criteria are designed, which are seek proportional plans if you can sort of do so among plans that equally well satisfy all the other criteria, we weren't seeing any kind of appreciable costs to the other criteria in dialing up the proportionality of the plan. But that's, this is kind of my quick and dirty summary of the numbers in this table, which again, let me just share that. Now that you've had enough discussion of it, you can see that here, as we get to this page, we're kind of looking at, can you optimize this absolute seat difference or this total seat difference? Can you get those numbers to be really good without losing the green boxes that you had secured before? And we were finding that you were really able to kind of have your cake and eat it too so far in terms of the asks that have been made. This is not a promise that this will remain true as you layer in lots more criteria over time. And in particular, you definitely need to think about the Voting Rights Act. This at least 40% POC column is in no way a replacement for the Voting Rights Act. But so far for the criteria that we've layered in, there hasn't been a kind of noticeable drop off in the ability to meet some of the criteria when you start paying more attention to proportionality.
Any other questions at this time, guys, with regards to stability versus responsiveness? Yeah, go ahead, Melissa. Sorry, I'm trying to click through everybody on the side of the screen. So
yeah, I'll just comment that I think that if we can go with a responsive plan that also meets that higher ranking criteria, I don't see why we wouldn't, because that's something that we've just heard over and over again from the public as something that they want in one way or another. Either they have overtly said that, or they've implied that by expressing their frustrations with not getting responses from their elected officials, feeling like folks are just secure in their incumbency and that sort of thing. They want those competitive districts. So again, I think if we're meeting that higher ranking criteria, I think we go with the responsive plan. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in here. This is really interesting, and so I do want us to be careful not to conflate the terminology and language we're using and that Moon has introduced to us with some of the things we've heard from public testimony. Because I think that the layperson who testified around responsiveness is likely not thinking of it from the statistical, like the way that Moon has presented it here. It might be similar, and Moon, maybe you can jump in, or others can jump in if you disagree or think that it is the same. But when the constituencies generally probably said like, oh, I wish my Congress or my representative was more responsive to my phone calls, to my emails, to my requests. What we're looking at is, from my understanding, not exactly the same thing. Also, when it comes to stability, we would have never heard anyone testify and say they want more stable districts, right? Because as Moon sort of alluded to, that's kind of new language applied to this data that we're seeing. And so I generally think that a more responsive plan is sort of synonymous with a competitive district. That's the way I've interpreted it. we have heard constituencies say they want their districts to be more competitive. So I guess if we're going to like associate responsive plans to something else we've heard from the constituents, it could be those who have reached out and wanted a more competitive map or more competitive districts. Yeah, and so I guess I think competitiveness is good, but again, we did not include that in our criteria. So I would also be hesitant to introduce almost a unnamed criteria like competitiveness as a essential variable in our decision in terms of what types of maps we're looking at or starting with, if we hadn't already included that in our criteria, even though I think it is good personally. That was a lot, sorry.
No worries. No, I agree, man. And I think you're absolutely right. Responsiveness, the notes that I have here is essentially equal to competitiveness in the district. And, if you look at this chart, these two charts that are on the screen here, you can kind of see that evident in the amount of districts that switch parties ultimately in the more responsive versus, the more stable. I think that the important thing is that including responsiveness is not going to deviate us from our goal of maintaining the priority of our criteria that we have. And so I think that that's something to kind of keep in the purview as well when introducing it. But, I do like the fact that, this is sort of an added bonus on to getting to some of that testimony that some of our constituents have said throughout the process too, of, kind of wanting to maintain that response. But I do think you're right in that we need to sort of be aware of our language that we're using in that intention of what that definition is. So.
Just quickly to say that I agree absolutely with the point that there's a few different things the word responsive can mean. It can mean like, does my elected official get back to me when I write to them? And this is not that kind of responsiveness. Totally agreed. But this is a term. Stable is a term that we kind of made up to describe things that track the proportionality line really closely. But responsive is an established term in the political science literature that means this: a plan whose the makeup of seats, the delegation changes when the will of the people as expressed by their votes changes. So a change in votes induces a change in representation. That's what responsive means in the literature.
Yeah, and I guess just to add on to that, generally, I think most people would feel that if their elected official has to worry about a competitive election, they will more likely be responsive in the other way we're thinking of it, which is responding to the constituencies, right? And so, again, I do generally agree that a responsive plan makes it more competitive and also could benefit the constituencies. This is maybe just an assumption of what might happen, but again, if the district is more competitive, then the representatives are more likely, from my understanding of political science and the research, more likely to need to listen to their voters in order to get their votes.
Yeah, so I agree. And so I guess we can perhaps do it this way. Is there any dissent from the idea of continuing along the lines of trying to create some of these preliminary maps that are more responsive versus quote unquote stable? I guess I'll open up the floor for that.
I think the only thing I'll put in there for stability, there is some research to suggest stability within. I mean, this is one of the literature that's like against term limits, for instance, suggests that expertise is something that you get in your representatives if they're in a more stable district, or maybe a district where they have to focus less on campaigning and more on governing. But I don't think we've heard that from my public testimony. From what I remember, no folks came to us and were like, hey, we want our elected people to be there longer so they're better fit to serve, So that would be one benefit of a stable a more stable map would be that people are more likely, representatives are more likely to stay there for longer in their respective seats and then have the expertise and such. Moon, is that correct to say that like a stable? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I want to agree with you again. This is just a festival agreement, but just agree with you that you're absolutely right characterizing the literature, that the argument is sometimes made that a downside of district being kind of in contention every time is more energy spent campaigning. But I read your public testimony that comes in through the portal, and I agree with you that we're not seeing that discussed, although maybe now that we're discussing it, and since there are obviously thousands of people listening to this live stream right now, you'll start to see sentiments in that direction. But that is some of the debate around responsiveness versus these various kinds of stability. That's another word that also is overloaded with many meanings, right? But in this case, those meanings are kind of lined up pretty well. Stably following the blue line does tend to translate, as we saw, to more districts that never change hands between the two parties that went 8 times D or 8 times R. So those two kinds of stability are kind of lined up well in this particular data set. And I don't swear that that would be the case in every state at every time, but that's the case in Wisconsin for the past cycle. So I think you have all the issues in view that are on my mind to help you make this kind of determination. And again, the guidance that I'm looking for tonight, it sounds like I'm hearing a general preference for responsiveness if it can be achieved with overall proportionality and with all the higher ranked criteria without sacrificing any of the higher ranked criteria. That's great for me for guidance. If you also want a starting plan that's stabler, just to have it for your process, say the word, because we've been generating lots of examples.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems like from this, I don't know if we necessarily have to do a formal vote, but it seems like there's not that much dissent or any dissent from creating more responsive maps. So I think it's okay in that respect to move forward with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. That's the part that I was looking forward to hearing about. So maybe I will say goodnight if there are no other requests or questions for me.
Sorry, Moon. Sorry to keep you. I did have one other. I noticed in the table there was one map that had a really high percentage, a population deviation percentage.
Yeah, that was answerable to a specific question from the line drawers.
Okay.
They said, if you loosened population deviation, would it give you benefits in these other metrics that you're measuring? And the answer was, again, none of this. There's so many possible maps out there, like 10 to the 100, many, like so many possible maps. So this is far from an exhaustive search, but from the searching that we did, we weren't seeing any payoffs in the other criteria to loosening the population deviation.
I have a similar question. I mean, map 16 versus 17, on map 16, you got the population deviation below 1%. Mm-hmm. Should we be asking you to focus on those maps below 1%? Or go ahead.
It's a great question. So just as a reminder, these maps are made out of whole wards. No wards were split in the making of these maps. No animals were harmed in the making of this motion picture. No wards were split to make these maps. Ultimately, in your process, you'll start with maps made out of wards, and then you may choose to instruct your line drawer to do what is the standard practice, which is after you've got your map kind of figured out at that level, then to break some wards to get to tune the population even more tightly. My experience in working with line drawers is that it's taking something within 2% deviation and tuning it down to whatever ultimate level you want at the end of the day is not hard to do by hand, but that allowing the algorithms a little more flexibility in terms of population deviation so that they can find more different things gives you the benefit of seeing different options before you tune them at the end of the day. The other reason that I haven't so far suggested a focus on tighter population deviation is that, remember, these are working with population estimates from 2015 to 19. And the sort of more precision might become more important when you get the new updated gospel numbers from the Census Bureau. That might be a time to start focusing more on your ultimate goals for population. But I'll mention for these assembly plans, the fact that all of them are within 2% of ideal means that top to bottom, they differ by no more than 4%. And the usual standard for legislative plans is 10%. So these are actually much more tightly balanced than the usual kind of legal guardrails for legislative plans. So seeking like really, really tight balance for these might be something that you only want to do towards the end. But I'm here to sort of follow your instructions. So if you'd like to see, that's why we experimented with different thresholds here. And if you'd like to see more focus on tighter balance now, that's definitely something that, as you saw from these tables, is possible to pursue, even without giving up anything else so far.
I don't have a strong opinion on that. I guess my next question would be, so what are the plans for the next line drawers subcommittee? And what are your plans, Moon, to bring to the August 11th? I mean, with what you've heard tonight, I think we've talked about bringing Senate maps, potential Senate maps, potential congressional. So I guess more specifically, are we having the line drawer committee this Thursday, Chris?
Yeah, that's what I have on my calendar. Let me just be sure, but I had it scheduled for Thursday at 4 p.m.
So is there anything we would expect then, Moon, or what?
Well, I mean, our next set of goals, now that we've I feel we've had a fairly thorough conversation for assembly, would be to take the same principles and apply them to Senate and congressional maps to give you like a menu. And now, right now you have, this table has 20 plans in it, but from the conversation, I feel like we can start to winnow down to a few examples. And then maybe you tell me, but maybe have 3 starting points. This is for you to decide how many starting points you want for assembly plans, Senate plans, and congressional plans. Another thing you should let me know is ultimately you'll need to make nested assembly and Senate plans. So your assembly maps will have to nest, your assembly districts will have to nest 3 to 1 inside your Senate districts. And the question is, for these starting points that you're using, do you want nesting already at this stage? Or is this something that you'd like to study first independently, Senate and assembly maps, and then later think about kind of finding your favorite ones and either grouping assembly districts or splitting the Senate districts? So there's a few more decisions to be made as we extend from the level of assembly to the other 2 levels. But today's conversation gives me an excellent sense of the kind of sentiment of the broader commission. It sounds like a general thumbs up for this approach. People feel that we're progressing towards your criteria, and I'll try to get this turned around for the other 2 levels as quickly as possible. Will that happen in time for Thursday? Maybe. Our team's really good. So we'll see how far we get.
Moon,
Go ahead, Amber.
I was just wondering, as we move into the Senate, if it would be possible to take like some of these responsive plans that are good examples and try taking one of those and nesting it, and then just de novo just do a Senate district, and just to look at some of the characteristics. I don't know, in my mind, I was always thinking that we would do assemblies and then nest them, but I know, as a commission, we need to discuss that. But I just wondered if it would change the characteristics of the maps.
It may, and that's kind of, as we progress past assembly to the other levels, that's something that we've been exploring a little bit internally, is to think about if you start by grouping assembly districts versus splitting Senate districts, which gives you kind of more flexibility in hitting all your benchmarks. I wouldn't say we have any kind of scientific conclusions about that, but we're equipped to help you do both, either grouping assembly districts or splitting Senate districts. For that, you'll want your line drawing intern, is intern the right word, Jack, on board for that, but we have the capacity to support you as you do either approach or a mix.
Well, it sounds like Thursday, maybe we should see that mix. I mean, I don't know if it's possible by Thursday, but it sounds like a mix of that so we can
Yeah, that'd be
understand.
great.
Okay, we'll see what we can get together.
I just put a message in the chat, but I just sent out the email with all the graphs and that Moon had discussed tonight to everyone. So it should be in your PMC email. Also be on the lookout. So I know Elizabeth and I both got locked out of our emails. So if you get a message to say you need to change your password, make sure you do, because it's really painful to get it back up once you do. So.
Mhm.
All right, Moon. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks everyone. Nice
Thank
seeing
you.
you.
Thank
See
you.
soon.
All right, guys. Well, that's all we have on the agenda for tonight. I know our next meeting is on the 11th, and the line drawers we're meeting this Thursday. But anything while we're in the larger group right now that anyone has, any questions, comments, or go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I got something for Jack mostly, or maybe Maddie. I don't know. Hey, Jack. The PMC Twitter, a lot of this like information, access to the maps, a lot of good stuff out there that I feel like could be more regularly shared with the public via Twitter, if it's not like creating infographics, right? I'm happy to support. I know earlier in the commission's time, I at one point I had access to the Twitter, although I never used it because I wasn't sure if I wasn't like there was like a plan to have some training on like what could or could not be posted or something like that, and just never came to fruition. So I guess one, if I'm able to support, I'm happy to do so. If not, do you think the Twitter could be a good space for sharing this type of information? Because I don't think anything's been posted since the 16th of July.
Yeah, I think that's great. Maddie just said to me that she's happy to take the lead on that. But also we do have a new comms person helping us out who Anne Marie met today. So I hear you loud and clear. And I think maybe what we'll do is have Maddie reach out to you directly and talk to you about some of that. Is that all right?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Sweet. So Maddie, it sounds like drafting the content versus me actually logging on and posting it. That sounds good. That's sort of what I was doing last time. Cool. I'll
Awesome.
keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah, our 160 followers deserve to know this information.
There's some important followers on that list, though. I'm not even kidding. There are. So,
Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments before we sign off here, guys? Oh, go ahead, Emery. Yeah.
No, I just was going to bring it up just because I think it's an expectation that maybe we haven't all discussed, as we move forward with getting our maps and trying to decide which ones we kind of like, even if they're the ones with the current data and not the final census data. We will have a line drawers, a graduate student intern to kind of help us shift lines over as we look through our second level criteria as communities of interest, right? So we'll be looking at that. And I think at that stage, even though we have a line drawers committee, each commissioner will probably want to focus in clearly on their area so that if there's anything weird in the maps that they see in their district, that they can, we can all bring it up, immediately and start dealing with it. Because I don't think any of us are experts across the state, and that it's probably at that point that each commissioner will have more responsibility of looking at their map. So that's kind of my expectation of myself, and I just wanted to bring that up so that you all can say if that's your expectation or not.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Okay, that's all.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth. Yeah.
So a question that I have, and sorry if I'm kind of derailing things, but just kind of want to understand. So timeline wise, so data comes out around maybe prior to the 16th. And then we have some type of meeting kind of surrounding that. But then where else do we see, I know that this graduate student, then kind of what time frame, I guess, and what Anne Marie had just talked about as far as focusing in on certain things, kind of how will that take place? And then will the line drawers committee, will they then have a set of maps that then they recommend to the full commission for vote, and kind of what is the timeline around that? I'm just not sure. Or have I missed something?
No, not at all. No. And so, that's what we've been kind of, the issue with this whole thing is kind of April was supposed to be the end date for all this. And so this has been sort of a moving target for us all. And so sort of onboarding the graduate student, trying to come up with, what to do, the next steps after the data, and then COVID kind of being wrapped up in all this has kind of moved that significantly. And so, I think once we get everything sort of in line with, getting preliminary maps that meet our criterion as much as possible. We still have to come up with, those 3 layers of maps. We still have to come up with our drafting process for our entire sort of ideology behind doing this whole thing, our entire method, right? And so there's going to be, commissioners that have to be a part of that process too. And that's something that we had discussed today, Howard and I as well. And so, there'll be more to come with that timeline as well. But, getting the actual data and working with the MGGG lab, as well as, sort of pulling from Howard, as well as, the governor's office will be kind of helping us narrow down where a timeline is. So I know it's kind of a dodgy answer, but that's essentially the direction that we're going here. So.
And how do we know if we're going to be fast enough, if you will?
And that's the other question too, right? Is there more emphasis on being the first out, or is there more emphasis of being, very direct and very responsive to what our constituency has said that they wanted, right? And a lot of that is, really dependent on how we want to go about it and how quickly it takes for us to synthesize the data that we get. And, especially when we're considering all 3 layers. And so, I think as of right now, that's unknown. But as soon as we can get this data out, we will have a better, more definitive answer. And in talking to Moon and talking with the subcommittee as well, it seems as though we are essentially ahead of where other groups are throughout the state. And so I think that we're on the right path right now. But I would hesitate to be the first out if we don't have, a general consensus of where we want to go. So if that's answering the question. Any other questions at all? All right, guys. Well, we'll see you guys back on the 11th, and subcommittee. I'll see you guys a little bit sooner. And so, be sure to look in your email for all that data if you want to kind of plug through it. It's really interesting to kind of see how everything lines up. And the additional 14 through 20 was good for us to see too, being on line draft subcommittee. So that's good. So I appreciate it. Everybody be safe. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you guys.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.